And a very good morning to you, wherever you are around the Caribbean, in fact, around the world, as you welcome to this very special forum, sponsored by the Caribbean Hotel and Tourist Association, the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center here in Kingston, Jamaica, and the Caribbean Tourism Organization, with very, very special support coming from the Department of Tourism of the U.S. Virgin Islands and Sandals International, who today really sent a clear message of confidence by announcing that they're now expanding into Curacao. I'm Julian Rogers, your host for the next 90 minutes, and we are going to have a very special opportunity to look at the possibilities of tourism recovery, strategies, in fact, for quick recovery across the region, which will be very, very important for economies and for the people, not just in the tourism sector, but every sector of society. We've really been suffering from the devastation, not just of recent storms, but particularly from the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we get into the forum sessions today, a bit of housekeeping. First of all, we'd like to encourage you to mute your microphones because we really don't want your conversations to spill over into the forum's activities. Also, if you want to pose questions, you've got an opportunity to do that. The Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen is where you'll pose those questions, and we'll come and have the panel respond to those questions in the second half of our presentations. Now, if you want a video of today's session, it's available. As long as you're registered, you're entitled to get a copy of it 48 hours after the event. And our session today, as I said earlier, is 90 minutes, and I hope that you all stay right here with us. Special welcome to you wherever you are, whether you're a government minister or you are involved in the tourism sector in any way possible. We're very, very happy that you could join us today. So let us start our forum with a number of things. One of them, of course, is to get an overview of the situation of the sector, particularly across our region. And one man who's really shouldered an extended responsibility for the sector is Jamaica's Minister of Tourism, Edmund Bartlett. And he's, of course, the co-chair of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center here in Kingston, Jamaica. So with a worldview, with a special look at its impact on the Caribbean, let's welcome Minister Bartlett right now. Minister Bartlett, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And a very pleasant good morning to all the participants on this very important panel. Moderator yourself, sir. And of course, to all those who are joining us in virtual land. I think it's a very important moment for us in the Caribbean. And I think it's a point where we need to take a deeper dive, a harder look at how this recovery of an industry which is so critical to our own survival and the well-being of our people is being made to evolve. So the UNWTO has described this current pandemic as the worst crisis that the international tourism has faced since records began in 1950. It has been projected that for 2020, between 910 billion to 1.2 trillion US dollars will be lost in export revenues from tourism, and 100 to 120 million direct tourism jobs are at risk as a result of international travel restrictions and reduced global demand. From the perspective of the Caribbean, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean has stated that the pandemic is affecting the economies of Latin America and the Caribbean through external and domestic factors whose combined impact will lead to the most severe contraction that the region has experienced since records began in 1900. The tourism sector has unfortunately borne the brunt of this contraction. Caribbean tourism is expected to contract by 20 to 30% this year, with tourist arrivals dropping by 75% in the last 3 quarters of 2020. This contraction in tourism is sharply slowing economic activity in the Caribbean, with growth projected to contract by 6.2% in 2020. The recovery, therefore, of tourism will crucially depend on how and when borders are open across the world. The Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center is tasked with leading this Caribbean region's recovery effort. As we look to the future, we will continue to strengthen collaboration with the networks that we've established locally here, regionally, and also internationally, as we have also gone into Kenya, into Malta, and we are about to go into Jordan and Nepal. And this whole plan is to help to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on destinations, as well as to identify effective strategies for their recovery and to enhance their preparedness and responsiveness to future shocks. The Center recognizes that the timely recovery of tourism is crucial to the overall economic stability of this region. The socioeconomic fallout from any prolonged disruption to the tourism sector will likely produce dire consequences for the Caribbean. The ILO described tourism as a major source of revenue and jobs in the Caribbean region. So that before the pandemics, the sector supported 16 of the 28 economies in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is in fact the most tourism dependent region on earth. With 20 of the top 20, we have 10 of the most tourism dependent countries, being led of course by the British Virgin Islands with a 92.6% dependence on tourism. The travel and tourism sector contributed $59 billion to the gross domestic product of the Caribbean in 2019. On average, the tourism industry directly contributes up to 33% of the gross domestic product and over 52% of the export receipts. In Antigua and Barbuda, for example, tourism accounts for 54% of GDP, 42% in Belize, 41% in Barbados, 38% in Dominica, and 34% here in Jamaica. The industry provides direct employment of 413,000 workers in the Caribbean, representing an average of 18.1% of the total employment. I have given you these numbers really to indicate how critical it is for us to move quickly and to recover effectively this industry so that the well-being of our region can be assured. And we have a number of factors that I believe we have to look at, one of which is to have a more synchronized protocol arrangements within the region. Part of the difficulty that the markets are having is having to deal with all of us as countries within the Caribbean with a different set of protocols, a different set of requirements. There is an urgent need, and I would put that as number one on the recovery chart, to enable a more cohesive and a more aligned set of protocols that the market can relate to and our partners can deal with. The second critical element for recovery, I think, has to do with training and development of the human capital within our region. I think this is a big area because the demand of the new tourism is going to be different from what we experienced pre-COVID. There's going to be a greater dependence on technology to drive a number of the experiences in the region. There's going to be a lot more reliance on health standards. And more importantly, there's going to be a lot more reliance on touchless technology, both at our airports to enable a more seamless entry, as well as in our hotels and our attractions across the region. So the third big area, I believe, is to look at this investment. There is need for now new investments to emerge within the Caribbean space so as to provide some of these critical equipment and infrastructure that is going to be needed to deal with this new set of visitors that are coming. And we made the point in another place that the collapsing of the traditional demographics as we know it into a single COVID generation, what we call Generation C, characterized by now a need for not just the sun, sea, and sun that we always give, of course, and the wonderful food and music, but now they want to be assured that the destination is safe. And safety for them is not just about national security issues, it's about health security, and it is about environmental security. So these are areas that we are going to have to invest more in. And as we build, we have to build different types of hotels also with different facilities that will be able to comport with the need for these new biosocial and other requirements that the industry is going to demand. And finally, I want to say that the collaboration that the region requires for recovery is going to be at a level like we've never seen before. I think we're going to have to look at how do we avoid competitiveness in the traditional sense, where we are all fighting each other to show who is able to do more and who can do whatever, but to get to a point where we recognize that the Caribbean has to be seen now as an integrated region, where we collaborate and we share our resources and we market ourselves in a multi-destination way. We need to look at how do we change the requirements to enable us to have a seamless travel facility in the region. Can we find a single Caribbean passport that allows us entry everywhere? Can we find a single visa regime that allows us to land in Jamaica and to move as domestic into Barbados, Trinidad, etc.? Can we find a situation where we rationalize our airspace, where a single fee is paid to enable airlines to move through with a lower cost for bringing visitors into our region? I think there are a number of new and innovative steps that we now have to look at. How do we create 3 critical outcomes to make our region really ready for with and post-COVID tourism? 1, security, safety, 2, and 3, seamlessness. And I believe that if we are able to make those 3 elements a feature of our experience in the Caribbean, then we will be well on our way to a recovery that will perhaps be shorter than the 3-4 year projection that is currently on stream. May it please you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Minister. I think you've given us a very important charge and set the framework for a very lively discussion later on. Particularly, I'm sure that many of the stakeholders here will have some questions for the panel. I know, Minister, that you will not be able to stay with us for the entire session, so I particularly welcome your contribution at this stage. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and the suggestions you put on the table will certainly be explored as we continue our debate on this forum. Let's now turn our attention to another minister, but before I do that, let me welcome the Honorable Carlos James, who is the Minister of Tourism, Civil Aviation, Sustainable Development, and Culture of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Thank you, Minister, for joining us, and we certainly look forward to the participation in this session later on today. Let's turn then to the next minister on our card, this one from Barbados, the Tourism and International Transport Minister, Lisa Cummins, who is the chairperson of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, an organization that has certainly tracked the development of this sector for several decades now and gives us key data and trends to follow. So Minister Cummins, welcome to the forum, and please present.
Thank you so much, Julian, and I want to join give Barbados's full support to the comments which were just made by Minister Bartlett from Jamaica. I want to express our appreciation to the CTO and to the CHTA for organizing this important session today, which I think is going to generate quite a number of important recommendations on the way forward. Certainly at a regional level, at the level of the heads of government earlier this year, we had the introduction of the commitment to have a Caribbean tourism policy across the CARICOM region. And that particular policy is going to be critical to identifying some of the key issues that the region is currently facing, that the region needs to take full cognizance of, and some of the things that will position us into future-proofing our bread and butter industry. Now, here in the region, we closed our borders for the most part to travel internationally in mid-March. Many of our countries have been reeling with the impact of COVID-19 since then, and most of the data tells us that there has been between a 57 to 64, in some instances even higher, decline year to date in travel arrivals. During April, May, and June, there was literally no travel taking place throughout the region. And in terms of occupancy rates, we saw in June, percentage rates declined somewhere in the vicinity of just under 30%. And by October, they had reached an all-time high of just under 50%. At the end of September, more than 75% of our regional destinations were then finding themselves gradually reopening borders to travel after developing travel protocols. And what we've seen is that between January and September 2020, and then further on into November, close to 9 million international visitors had visited the region, but that represented a decline of close to 70% over the same period for 2019. So there is no question in anyone's mind that COVID-19 has had a significant quantitative and a qualitative impact on the standard of living and our economies across the region. And then that means that we're going to be having to look at a number of issues that we have been treating to over the last few months, but perhaps in some instances existed even before there was COVID-19. COVID-19, for example, has put on the table, as Minister Bartlett quite rightly said, the challenges with regard to travel restrictions. What has been the impact of travel restrictions across the region, many of which have not been harmonized from the northern to the southern to the deep southern Caribbean? Many of our travel restrictions remain very different and very divergent. One of the first items on the agenda for us as a region ought to be the identification for the purpose of air travel, and then ultimately when the cruise industry resumes, of harmonization across our travel protocols, because even with the introduction of vaccinations and therapeutics, there is still the expectation that there will be travel restrictions in place to contain the spread of COVID-19 for the foreseeable future. We also have to look at the collaborations that are necessary across our agencies. We have airports, we have seaports, we have ministries of tourism, but we also have now ministries of health, public health. We've looked at the kind of virtual integration and digitization of touchless transportation, as Minister Bartlett spoke about, and we now need to treat to the coordination of our interagency travel as a multidisciplinary interagency structure, that allows us to be able to make immediate decisions across all agencies, therefore making travel seamless, timely, and efficient. There also needs to be a significant effort for us to increase consumer confidence. And I say it in this context as well. We've had some challenges where, certainly at the level of air transportation, we have had many partners who have been able to prey on the fact that there are differing protocols across the region, and where there is less restrictiveness or no restrictiveness, they have found themselves taking more and more international guests there. And quite frankly, that is exactly how COVID-19 has thrived, by the opening of borders in a way that does not manage to stress the importance of testing and even minimize levels of quarantine that allow us to keep our population safe, our visitors safe, and our countries across the region COVID-free for the most part. And so there is an important need for us to avoid having low protocols in place or no restrictions in place for entry that then allow us to put our populations at risk. Then, of course, there is the social and the economic impact. Here in Barbados, we introduced a program called the BEST program because we understood that we were treating to an industry level where there were direct tourism services that were significantly affected by the numbers that we've spoken about earlier. There were hotels that were directly impacted, and then the downstream tourism sectors that equally were badly affected as a result of the indirect impact of tourism by way of economic and commercial activity. And so what we've seen here is that tourism, deeply integrated into the value chain of all of our economies, needs to be made more mainstream into our productive sectors as a way not just of supporting national development, but regional development. And one of the calls that I would want to make, aside from regionalization of regulatory management and border management across the region, but the regionalization also of production integration, a key tenet of our CARICOM treaty that allows for us to go back into first principles as we have treated to production across our region. Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, Belize, Main producer, Vincent and the Grenadines, some of the significant producers of agricultural products. COVID has shown us that as maritime transport became challenging in some instances and supply chain interruption became a challenge, that we also needed to treat to the issues of integration of agriculture and manufacturing at a regional level across all productive sectors into our tourism industry and more generally into our economies to ensure that we protect our region. On that basis, here in Barbados, we have started quite a significant amount of work on value chain integration, but we've also looked at the traditional industry as it has stood, and we would want to work very closely, certainly in my role as chairman of CTO, to work with all of our partners on a number of issues. One is digitization. Under the BEST program, we have developed a direct support program for the hotel and direct tourism services. We have understood that at the level of $300 million being injected into the tourism industry, that we have needed to be able to have a wage support for a period that is yet undefined. So we're not sure when this is going to end. So for 24 months, we will provide support to wages in the tourism industry, to our hotels and to our direct support services. In addition to that, we've also emphasized the need for digitization. Even before COVID, we knew that our sector needed to be upgraded and that the model needed to be reformed. And so we have gone in very aggressively with a digitization program. Thirdly, we've also looked at the skills. We have a need to upgrade our tourism skills as well. And so the integration of multidisciplinary teams within our tourism skills upgrading is very much a part of the agenda that we would want to see unfolding throughout the region to modernize our sector. And fourthly and finally, there is the element of our renewable energy and resilience. We are a vulnerable region. We've spoken at great length globally and in every multilateral forum on the need for our countries to treat positively and aggressively with the issues of climate change and resilience and vulnerability. And so we have used this opportunity to inject capital into helping our tourism businesses become more resilient by switching to water-saving devices and also greening and the use of renewable energy. These are some of the issues that we would want to put on the table across the region. And then finally, I want to speak specifically to the need for us to emphasize domestic and intra-regional tourism. I would welcome the day across the region where we're able to have joint marketing in the same way that the cruise industry comes on a 7-day and a 14-day itinerary, and persons travel by sea to one or more, sometimes 5 or 6 destinations in 7 days. We would want to welcome across the region joint collaboration which promotes seamless travel across the Caribbean to experience multiple levels of Caribbean authenticity. What we have done over the time is allowed many external parties to almost white label the Caribbean as just simply a region of sun, sea, and sand. And we would welcome an opportunity, and we think that this is very much the time. We have done an extraordinary job here in the region of keeping our region safe, and we want to be able to showcase our region and our countries to our citizens here in the Caribbean. And so those are some of the things that I would want to share with you, and I'm looking forward to this year ahead of us, giving us new confidence, new opportunities, and new vigor to tourism, notwithstanding the challenges that we have seen this year.
Thank you very much, Minister Cummins. And I note the complementary output that has come from both ministers of the Caribbean in these matters. And certainly you both identified common positions in some cases and also identified some new areas of focus, which again, I think will lead to some very lively discussion later on in the forum. I did adjust the order of presenters mistakenly, but I think fortunately that Minister Cummins followed Minister Bartlett in that way, and therefore I would admit to some merging of interest there. So let me stay with the schedule and turn our attention then to a world view. And there's where we bring in the representative of the World Travel and Tourism Council, and none other than Virginia Messina, who will give us that particular worldview, but obviously the output will have some impact on our region because we're really relying on our source markets to be the savior and part of that recovery of our sector. Let's bring in then Virginia Messina. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Julian. And I will just add our global perspective to the excellent points made by Minister Bartlett and Minister Cummings just recently. So for those of you that are not familiar with the World Travel and Tourism Council, WTTC, we have been around for 30 odd years, and we represented travel and tourism private sector globally. So our members are the representatives and CEOs of the leading companies across all the different regions and industries. And more recently, we also have destinations added into our network. So if we move on to the next slide, what we have done for 30 years is quantify the impact of travel and tourism across 185 economies and countries. And what we basically show is the impact of our sector in GDP and jobs. So what we were seeing in 2019 and experiencing in 2019 is that we were really leaving the golden age of travel. So for 9 consecutive years, our sector was outpacing the growth of the global economy. We can see it in these numbers shown in this slide. Whilst the global economy, for example, in 2019 grew at 2.5%, our sector grew at 3.5%. And again, that had been a trend for nearly a decade. So our sector represented 10.3% of global GDP and created 330 million jobs in the planet. So that is 1 in every 10 jobs were in our sector. And not only that, but also 1 in every 4 new jobs were created in our sector. So next slide, please. Obviously, we've been looking at the impact. And if we look at these numbers in the Caribbean, and we know Minister Bartlett has already share the picture of what our sector represents, but I guess the only figures I wanted to look at was precisely that growth, particularly in the Caribbean. The growth of travel and tourism in 2019 nearly doubled the growth of the regional economy. So whilst the Caribbean GDP grew at 1.9%, the growth of our sector in the region grew at 3.4%, and contributed, according to our numbers, nearly 14% of the region's GDP, and supported to 2.8 million jobs in the region. Next slide, please. So we have been looking at the impact of COVID-19, of course, and we have been looking at different scenarios based on when the restrictions were easing. So we saw some green shoots of recovery during the summer, particularly in Europe and in some particular regions. And based on those forecasts, we came up with a number of scenarios in terms of what the impact of this pandemic will have in our sector. So currently, we foresee a sort of worst case scenario of more than 174 million jobs that could be impacted in our sector. And according to these numbers, actually about 142 million have already been impacted. So again, this is all going to depend on how, as we close the year, and in terms of how those, how the vaccine, for example, is now playing a role, how many of these jobs can actually be recovered. But we know that at least 142 million jobs are likely to be lost in our sector this year. Next slide. And in the Caribbean, how these numbers look like. So we know about 1.7 million jobs will be lost in the region this year. This is a 61% loss in terms of travel and tourism jobs. And if there's no improvement in terms of the restrictions, and if there's no recovery during December, this number could be all the way up to 1.9 million. So we know at least 200,000 of these jobs are currently at stake, and based on all on the different measures that are in place that could provide some sort of recovery to our sector. So in terms of GDP loss, it's again $36 billion that are likely to be lost in the region. So that's a 62% drop. And in the worst case scenario, that could go all the way up to 42 billion US. So these are, of course, very incredible numbers. And of course, as we know, international travel has been more impacted. So we have seen a drop of about 60% that could go again all the way up to 68%. And there has been some recovery in the domestic travel across the globe, and also, as the minister was saying, in the region as well. Next slide. So as part of our work last year, crisis preparedness and management was precisely one of the WTTC strategic priorities, because we know how prone our sector is to crisis, and particularly in the Caribbean, we've obviously seen our sector has been hugely impacted by other types of crises, such as natural disasters. So we did a report in 2019 about this crisis, but also how our sector actually has become more resilient. And over the last decade, we have seen how our sector actually recovers quicker from the different types of crisis. So in terms of diseases and outbreaks, what we see is an average recovery of about 19 months. So again, and we can see that could go all the way from 10 months, which is the fastest recovery, and up to 36 months in the worst case scenario. So what is it that can be done in order to enable a faster recovery? And again, this was part of our analysis, and actually what Minister Bartlett was saying in his opening remarks is really music to our ears, because precisely that coordination and synchronization is really going to be critical for a recovery. So if we look at previous crises, for example, like the 9/11 crisis in the US, but unfortunately, as we know, back then our sector was reinvented. And this is another, this is the second time that we're going to have to reinvent ourselves. And in this occasion, it's not going to be a security crisis, but we know it's a health crisis. But what is it that we can learn from previous crises that will help us this time round? And what can help us is really avoid, not trying to create new travel processes. How can we absolutely make that journey safe and seamless? We know the health component is going to become very relevant, but we need to make sure that there is a cohesive approach that provides confidence to travelers, because what we know is this is not only a health and safety crisis, but it is most certainly a confidence crisis. So again, we have learned from previous crises that collaboration across governments is fundamental. If we look at the global financial crisis back in 2008, when the G20 was created, when governments started working together and really focused on this, that enabled a faster recovery. Next slide, please. So we have been basically looking at 4 principles for the recovery. And again, linked to what I was just saying, this international coordinated approach is going to be fundamental for a recovery. All of these different measures that are in place, such as quarantines and obviously the closure of borders, and what we know governments are going to prioritize health, and that is absolutely the priority. But there has to be some very practical measures in place that can ensure a responsible reopening of our sector, that can create that recovery and obviously ultimately benefit the economic recovery. So, we know all of these different travel barriers have been hugely damaging to our sector, but we have also seen how some very specific measures, such as these travel bubbles or corridors, have been hugely beneficial in some particular cases. Earlier this week, particularly in the UK where I am based, we saw a new scheme being announced by the UK in terms of business travel. And that is also very important, that we focus not only on leisure, but in the contribution that business travel brings to the economy. So there is now different schemes looking at shorter travel and how can quarantines be avoided. In terms of the seamless traveler experience, again, this has been a priority for WTTC for a number of years, and we're looking at all the different measures. So there will be no recovery unless there is a comprehensive testing regime in place. So for us, testing is going to be really fundamental for the recovery. And even when a vaccine is available, we've obviously welcomed the news recently about all of these different vaccines being approved, which is wonderful news, but we know it's going to take some time to inoculate the whole population. And therefore, a testing regime needs to coexist. But in terms of testing, what we have been advocating for is rapid testing. Not only that is obviously efficient, but also affordable. The current PCR tests that are being accepted by most governments now, unfortunately, are highly inconvenient. They take really long time, and the cost can be very restricted for most travelers. So what we've been advocating for, as I said, is rapid testing, the so-called antigen tests that need need to be in place at departure to avoid importing and exporting the virus, just as Minister Cummings was mentioning. We have also seen a number of technologies that are now playing a role, all these different health certificates or health passes, and we have been working with a number of organizations on this to make sure that these technologies enable this safe and seamless journey in the future, which has to be the case when there's a vaccine. These technologies will also play a role, but we need to make sure that a vaccine does not become a requirement for international travel. And again, that is why testing is going to be so relevant. The adoption of safety protocols, and again, this is another area where WTTC has been doing a lot of work. And back since May, we released a number of different protocols across all the different industry, because precisely that coordination and that standardization that Minister Bartlett was talking about is going to be fundamental. So we need to be able to provide that confidence to consumers, and the only way that we're going to do that is by having a consistent approach. And then lastly, or continued government support. So we have seen during this period of time a number of different schemes supporting our sector, whether it's fiscal schemes, whether it's support to employees and workers, whether it's grants or even VAT exemptions. So all of these different measures are going to be fundamental as we begin to recover into next year. And so again, we've been advocating for this government support to be in place to continue to support our sector and also enable a faster recovery. So I think that's all I had for my introduction. And again, thank you for the invitation, and a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you very much to Virginia Messina, representing the World Travel and Tourism Council, laying out for us the critical developments required, particularly in the partnership between the private sector and governments as part of the recovery exercise. And you've identified some critical elements here, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to expand on a little bit more. Let's continue our forum. And if you're just joining us, a very special welcome to you. We're looking at the tourism recovery possibilities and strategies, and we have a distinguished panel, international panel. In fact, we've heard from Minister Bartlett of Jamaica and Minister Cummings from Barbados, and recently from Virginia Messina of the World Travel and Tourism Council. Let's turn our attention now to a contribution from the United Nations, in fact, from the World Tourism Organization. Representing them today and providing role and support is Michelle Julian.
Thank you very much, Julian, for the kind introduction. And thank you very much for the invitation and to speak on behalf of the United Nations World Tourism Organization in this so needed knowledge exchange platform with all these distinguished panelists. Minister Bartlett, which has been an advocate for the recovery and for the restart of tourism, already mentioned some of the work UNWTO has been doing to assess the impact of COVID-19 on international tourism. But I will elaborate a little bit more on our scenarios. So as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused an unprecedented disruption to tourism. And this is translated in a massive fall of international tourist arrivals or overnight visitors. Between January and August 2020, international tourist arrivals declined by 70%. This is translated into a loss of 700 million international tourist arrivals, and this is amid travel restrictions impacting all regions of the world. But if we look at the numbers, at the value, we see that this has translated into a loss of $730 billion loss in tourism exports, which is about 8 times the income loss of the 2000 economic crisis. But if we see beyond the numbers, we have to bear in mind the huge and dramatic social and economic impact this is causing. UNWTO estimates that 100 to 120 million direct tourism jobs are at risk, but also millions of businesses, especially small and medium enterprises, and also millions of livelihoods. So based on the latest data and trends, we estimate that international tourist arrivals will end the year close to 70% decline. So this is based on our scenarios that we draw in May 2020. And if we see the blue line, I mean, it's getting closer to a scenario 2. So we expect a decline of 70% in international tourist arrivals between scenario 1 and scenario 2. Of course, this is in a context of high uncertainty, and things can change towards the end of the year. Next, please. And if we look ahead, if we look at the 2021 and 2024 scenarios and the expected recovery of international tourism, we estimate that based on our scenarios, it will take 2.5 to 4 years to recover pre-pandemic 2019 levels. Of course, this will much depend on 3 factors. First of all, is the reversal of the pandemic, that virus containment. The second is a return of the traveler confidence. And last but not least, the third factor or assumption is a major lifting of travel restrictions. We also assume that there will be a strong rebound by the middle of 2021. So travel restrictions are fundamental and they have been identified as the main factor weighing on the recovery of international tourism. Next, please. So this is why it's so revealing to see that 70% of destinations, and that's as of 1st of November, and it translated to 152 destinations, have eased travel restrictions since the global lockdown in April. Though still 59 destinations have kept their border closed to tourism. But it's even more relevant to see that the Americas is one of the world regions where 78% of all destinations have eased restrictions. And among them, 23 destinations, which are small island developing states. Next. And this is important because I think it's not coincidence that small island developing states are getting more open and are easing travel restrictions because of the economic impact also of tourism in those islands. If we see that export revenues can reach up to 90% of total exports in some of the islands, and that also women account for half of more of the workforce in several islands, as we know that tourism is a large creator. It's important also to make efforts to open it up again to international tourism. Next, please. And this is why UNWTO, since the beginning of the crisis, has set priorities for tourism recovery. UNWTO has called, since the beginning of the crisis, for a safe, responsible, coordinated, and seamless restart of tourism by joining efforts with international organizations, for instance, IATA or ICAO, or even WTTC has participated too, with governments, as governments support is key also to the restart of tourism, and with other bodies through the Global Tourism Recovery Committee under the leadership of our Secretary General, Mr. Zourapoul Likashvili. And this is also with the aim to restore confidence and trust, with the aim also to come up with standardized international protocols around the world. So what we aim is to look for public-private collaboration, for coordination, and for innovation and sustainability. We will be the key pillars of the new normal to be able to build back better and build back stronger. Next, please. And last but not least, data is key. Data is key to make strategic decisions, and insights are more needed than ever in this situation. So this is why we have put together the UNWTO Tourism Recovery Tracker with traditional data and also big data covering the main indicators. So I'd invite you also to have a look at the UNWTO Tourism Recovery Tracker in our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle, Julian. You've certainly given us a couple of critical things for us, particularly in the Caribbean, when you focus on the SIDS impact of this particular situation. And I'm happy to hear that you also will be providing us with the kind of data, you talk about big data there, that will be very important in terms of our forecasts for the future. So a lot of that, again, we'll expect will be expanded on when we come to our question and answer session later on. Let me remind you that you can pose your questions simply by using the button at the bottom of your Zoom app, and we'll get to those questions a little later on. Let's continue, though, with this important forum, looking at the possible strategies for recovery of tourism for our economies across this Caribbean. And let me bring another Caribbean personality into the forum and welcome from the Caribbean Development Bank, Dindyal Remratton. And he looks particularly at the economic impact and the challenges for our region. Mr. Remratton?
I thank you very much, moderator, and thanks to all for having me here. So I'll get jump straight into it. What we're looking at is tourism, fostering development and growth. The key point about this line I want to bring out is that it's not only about returning the growth rate to tourism and the growth rate to our economies, but about finding development in our recovery and finding the impacts on our peoples and our livelihoods to make sure that whatever recovery we have is sustainable, is all inclusive, and it can be used as a bedrock as we rebuild stronger. That quote was used earlier. Here, if we look at previous GDP growth rates for the Caribbean, there's an interesting point that will come out. If you consider the yellow hatched line and the green hatched line, which shows the difference between the Caribbean economies and the other small island developing states, you would see the last time we faced a major crisis, which was the global financial crisis, the growth rate for the region was slower in recovering than other small island developing states. So the story here is not only about size, because these are other small island states who were able to find a stronger path to recovery. And the gap actually between our regions has widened post this financial crisis. Now, I'm saying we are facing another crisis, not financial in this case, but the point is we need to ensure our recovery does not leave us lagging further behind. And this requires approaches to development that will be able to reach every member of the population in an equitable manner and in a timely manner. These are the CDB estimates for 2020 and 2021 post the COVID pandemic. What I would like to point out here is that obviously assumptions inform a lot of estimates. So it's not really to focus on the different numbers that you may be seeing around, but focus on the trend and the pattern we are picking up. For 2020, our assumptions suggest that economic growth will decline in double digits. Right now, the hard number, the soft number we're working with is a decline of 12.3% for the region before picking up to 5.2% growth in 2021. The message there, even when we recover, it won't be a full immediate recovery. There's been a lot of talk about whether it's V-shaped or U-shaped. Well, the message from the previous slide shows that it takes a while for us to recover, and that recovery won't be an immediate get back to pre-COVID levels. COVID has left a mark on us, and it will remain. When we look at the projections as well, we see that with the exception of Guyana, who we know came into the oil market as a major player this year, all our economies are expected to decline, with 15 to 16 countries actually experience double-digit declines. We traditionally grow at slow rates, so to experience a double-digit decline in 1 year suggests that it will take some time to recover from this. We look here quickly. If we go to the next slide this shows our growth rate pattern, and you would see what we're speaking about. And you would see that if most countries in their recovery will not be making up for the declines they experienced in the previous year. And so it will only partially compensate. The next slide just highlights, and I will gloss over this next slide because it's been brought out in many of the previous presentations, the importance of tourism to our GDP. We could see that with the exception of some of the major commodity producers, tourism contributes close to half, well, more than 30% of GDP in most economies. It's an important source of employment and, of course, as a share of exports. But as I said, we'll gloss over this because it's been covered earlier. So the next slide tries to bring out now what I spoke about earlier. In the light of the major crisis we last faced, how long have our Caribbean economies taken to recover? So we do see that some countries recovered within a 2 to 5 year period. But really look at that waterfall or reverse waterfall. We see countries taking 8, 9, 10 years to recover. In fact, Anguilla and Barbados, based on the return to real GDP levels, have yet to recover from the global financial crisis. So if the COVID crisis is as severe as we are seeing it to be, the question is, do we expect the next decade to be a decade of recovery, or a decade where we recover and rebuild? And this is important for us to consider when we consider approaches to this recovery. The next slide looks at the tourism, using it as a catalyst for development. But as we started off by saying, growth needs to be inclusive and sustainable. We need to ensure we have increased local content and participation. Considering the fact that we have increasingly high levels, and this was before COVID, of youth unemployment in the region. We had situations where some countries experienced 1 in 4 persons being unemployed. Imagine what COVID has done to these numbers. So any recovery needs to ensure we get more of our population involved. We need to look at higher value-added tourism. It's more than just visitor spend. It's about building a fabric, a product that goes beyond just one visit. Also, intra-regional destinations. There are 2 things to consider when we consider regionalism. One that has been spoken about earlier, where we want to produce this one Caribbean experience. I think that's critical, because if we look at the European and North American tourist product, it's a lot more than just visiting one location. So that's something that I don't need to stress more. It's been stressed a lot. The other thing is that over the last decade, we've seen growth in intra-regional travel across the main players. The Asia Pacific grew on average 4.7%. North America, you saw close to 6% intra-regional travel, and Europe above 5%. In this period, the Caribbean has been near stagnant or slightly declining in its rates of intra-regional travel. So if I want to use the cliche low-hanging fruit, this is where it lies. The first thing might be to get ourselves traveling more among our countries and building on this fabric. And lastly, diversification and developing a comparative and competitive advantage. It's not about putting our eggs in one basket. The tourism recovery, if we could increase the local content, the agricultural content, if we could increase the manufacturing content from within the region, gives us a good platform that this recovery could be all-encompassing and a lot more holistic to get us off on the right foot. The next slide speaks to this exact point of competitiveness. One of the key things if we want to continue to generate rents from tourism is to grow our ability to attract new investments. It's about developing a competitive advantage through the right investment environment. In spite of doing business reforms and the fact that our countries have been improving their rating a bit, we still see that over the last decade, the average rank of the region in terms of competitiveness has been more than slipping. It's been a serious decline we've seen there. So it's about, yes, implementing these reforms, but implementing these reforms faster and ensuring that they are entrenched in a manner that we aren't being left behind. Because the competitiveness framework is what will attract not only foreign direct investment in tourism, but in some of the other areas such as agriculture and manufacturing that can give us a deeper fabric of recovery. And I'm always reminded of Sir Arthur Lewis's statement when we spoke about surplus labor theory. Yes, we want industrialization, but we want to also protect our agricultural and our domestic industries, because this is where we find the fabric to match that surplus labor to a demand for employment. Finally, I know I'm close to time, is and this slide, the beauty of it, the next slide, is that it could be used in almost any discussion on recovery, on GDP, on economic activity. It's about strong implementation. Whatever the solution is we earmark to recover tourism, to recover our total economic activity, we need to deliver and implement. So it's more than just planning. It's about making sure we get the right KPI targets. It's about making sure we do the right audits and we get to the prioritized structure to growth. As you would have seen in my bio slide, I am a statistician, so I always shamelessly take the plug to say we also need to ensure we invest in statistics. It's about getting the right statistics that represent and match our realities and using it to have evidence-based decision making. So yet again, I don't miss the beat to say that we need to invest in our statistics office, not only big data, and get the right data for the right result. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amratan from the Caribbean Development Bank, of course, making a very, very strong case for us not just to guess, but to really use critical information to make this recovery really work. I like the fact that you talk about making this an all-inclusive exercise, and particularly as well, the matter of adding really higher value. So some of the things you raise here are very, very critical. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, that we'll certainly be asking you to expand some more on some of those objectives. All right, here I'd like to take an opportunity to literally play a commercial. Yeah, well, I mean, who would miss the opportunity with an audience like this not to be able to reach out and say, very, very special welcome to our region? Well, that opportunity is going to the U.S. Virgin Islands and their Department of Tourism, who are extending a very special welcome to all of us.
Welcome to the Virgin Islands. Oh na na, oh na na na. Reconnect with paradise. The VI smiles with me, with the emeralds of the seas. The Virgin Islands, they are calling out to me. The VI smiles with me, with the emeralds of the seas. The Virgin Islands, they are calling out to me.
Well, with an invitation like that, who could resist going out to the U.S. Virgin Islands? And on a visit some time ago, I was really marveling at the fact that every window I looked out from where I was staying, I could see another island worth discovering. So there you are. The invitation, pick it up when you can. Let's continue our tourism forum, and we're talking about recovery and looking at possible strategies. We've heard from a number of presenters today. And let's turn our attention now to welcoming our host from the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, the Director General and CEO, none other than, of course, Frank Comito.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you to all of the earlier panelists. The info and the insights has just been really helpful and will help to guide a lot of our efforts and thinking going forward. Next slide, please. Let's talk just very briefly the upside of tourism. I mean, we sometimes need to remind ourselves it's been a driver for incredible positive change in the region over the past 50, 60 years. Major revenue and employment generator, drives infrastructure development, builds human resource capacity, and develops our people. It's compatible with tourism, with the Caribbean culture of hospitality. So it fits really well with who we are and what we offer. Supports and creates local entrepreneurial activity, enhances safety and security, particularly around our airports, promotes cultures, celebrates uniqueness, differentiates our markets. It attracts added airlift for travel, not only for visitors, but for residents, and that reduces the costs as well, even though we like it reduced even more. It protects and enhances the environment. Not always, but generally it does. It's part of our value. It facilitates recovery following a crisis, and it's a standards bearer. It challenges us to do our best, and we can see that in how many Caribbean nationals have matriculated and moved up into the ranks of management and ownership in so many different ways. And I mean, to the UNWTO goals as well, it promotes peace, understanding, and unity. It's a great business to be in. Next slide, please. I like the UNWTO. Gloria, this was done a number of years ago. I'm sorry, Virginia, this was done a number of years ago, and I think it's always relevant. The upside, it's often a misunderstood socioeconomic development tool. As the dollars circulate around our economy, it touches everything. And it allows for government services, for schools, education, police, infrastructure, other types of businesses, the bank, the beauty parlor, and so on and so on. And that's very well illustrated in this graphic. Next slide, please. We have challenges, and it presents challenges to countries and companies. We're vulnerable to economic cycles, crisis situations. Planning and managing growth has always been a challenge because it has demands on utilities, infrastructure, and support services with limited resources. We're competing in a very high cost environment, high operating costs, inconsistent productivity, transportation and utility costs, unbalanced supplier arrangements, even within our own industry. Revenue leakage, over-reliance on imports mentioned earlier, in some cases we've seen compromising of our cultural identity. The policy balance is always a struggle and a challenge for the industry, ensuring that balance between government and private sector needs, particularly around things like taxes and regulations, labor laws, and investment incentives. And airlift and access, the ease and the cost, and how do we make that more affordable and more accessible? Human resource needs, greater public-private sector investments in people is needed, particularly around supervisors and areas and above. And we do compromise the environment in some cases, inconsistent practices in safeguarding our natural assets. Next slide, please. So if you look here, the challenges as well are our global challenges that we're facing. You know, the Caribbean tourism, its model and value proposition, we face significant challenges, profoundly limiting its development and growth aspects. And I'm not going to go into the details in here, but they're environmental, they're in terms of the challenges of keeping up with global trends, and in perception. We're perceived often as being a one-dimensional kind of destination when we have so much more to offer, and also perceptions of safety, perceptions of value for money, and that contagion challenge that we have. We are a Caribbean, but we're many destinations and opportunities within the Caribbean, but often the public feels if something happens in one area, it's affected the entire Caribbean. So it's our benefit and our bane being under that brand of Caribbean as well. Next slide, please. As pointed out earlier, we're resilient. Our industry is incredibly resilient globally as well as regionally. And you can see here, this is regional visitor arrivals impact, how quickly we rebound over the past 20 odd years from various types of crisis situations. We bounce back, and we bounce back usually better and stronger than we were. Next slide, please. In today's COVID-19 global environment, some say it's time to diversify away from tourism. Tourism presents, I disagree fully with that. I think tourism presents the Caribbean with its greatest opportunity to recover and renew. And as we heard from some of the other presenters, diversifying with and within tourism should guide our reshaping. we should go with our strengths. As I love this quote here from the author of The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, Why Some Nations Are So Rich and Some So Poor, from David Landis. Play to your advantage. Our geographical and natural advantages are incredible. Next slide. While challenged, these are some of our assets. We're well positioned to recover through tourism. We have a strong base of customer loyalty, unmatched natural beauty, proximity and access to major markets, our product diversity, resiliency and our ability to quickly bounce back from adversity, our appeal to multi-generational types of markets, our health safety commitments during particularly so obvious during these during this crisis, with public-private sector collaboration around health safety that we've never seen before, and we've got some of the great best standards going on right now. We're built for wellness. We're a culture of hospitality, and we have a Caribbean brand recognition. So we've got some tremendous assets to continue to draw from. Please, next slide. I would suggest, I'm sure I missed some things. I heard some great things that I missed as well in my thinking in terms of focal points for tourism's recovery. Our health safety protocols, our focus, our protocols, our training, monitoring, recognizing, promoting, all of that. And fortunately, we have one of the strongest public-private sector partnerships I've ever seen in a collaboration with the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA, the CTO, and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. Point of recovery, communications and public relations. We've got to continually tell our story and power to heal the world. And we've been doing that. CTO has been doing that. And we want to continue to do that. And we need to continue to do that at the local company and at a regional level. We need to restore local confidence. This is a point I want to emphasize. A lot of our population has been impacted by this in very serious ways. We've got to restore local confidence in tourism and its essential role in stimulating recovery. So we have some internal public relations that we need to do as well, and information sharing. We need to adapt to changing customer behaviors and concerns around health safety, around tech touch balance, and other areas. Stimulate industry survival and recovery by some of the policies and best practices. By example, what Minister Cummins mentioned in terms of what they're doing in Barbados, best practices which are working, temporary safety nets, issues of taxes and utilities for temporary reprieve, refinancing, new supplier arrangements, particularly with some of the global tour operators who have had onerous arrangements with us in the past. And we need to improve our efficiencies, obviously, train, empower, and recognize our people, strengthen the linkages and reduce our leakages. We need a sustainable mindset. While we're doing all of these things, we need to recover now, and we are working on many of these things and need to work on more of them. We need to keep our eyes to the future and sustainability and the environmental kinds of challenges that ministers had mentioned as well. And marketing, we need new approaches to stimulate business, more with less, more together. And finally, we need to partner, collaborate, coordinate as an industry, locally, regionally, and globally, much more effectively. Next slide, please. I'm not going to get into the details here, but in terms of rethinking marketing, companies, destinations as a region, really, we're best positioned to compete globally in the face of ongoing environmental factors, changing consumer behaviors and demands, and the growing attraction of alternative destinations globally. Our diversity, our people, our proximity, our sense of rhythm in our product and what we offer, and our nature as well, and our imagination are all incredible strengths that we have to capitalize on to recover. Next slide, please. Advancing a sustainable tourism recovery strategy, I would ascertain, and we've heard about it before, but I think the opportunity is absolutely right in front of us at an unprecedented level. We need to commit to a more conscious, coordinated form of tourism marketing and development, collaborating locally and regionally, and harnessing the power of this Caribbean brand, while maintaining our individual identity and marketing ourselves individually, but also recognizing the power of that brand. Next slide, please. Wrapping up here. Sustainably, what will it take? leadership in industry, government, from NGOs, from multilateral organizations, engaged and committed local and regional support, local and regional management of ongoing recovery effort process, and establishing strategic directions and a plan, and the resources to guide and deliver on that plan. And we heard some insights on that from both the ministers earlier in terms of directions and where we could be headed in that regard. Next slide, please. I'd like to finally mention that building greater understanding and support for tourism recovery is essential. We are about to launch next week. We will be launching an initiative that we've been working on with Sandals and the U.S. Virgin Islands and other stakeholders we're going to be inviting to be involved in it, called Caribbean Tourism is Our Key. It is indeed our key to recovery. And we want to celebrate what we've done, but also challenge ourselves to all get together, work collaboratively in a much more organized way to support the recovery. Next slide is my thank you.
All right, so there we are then. Frank, of course, throwing out what I consider might be just an international campaign. We've got the power to heal the world. And certainly that is a very, very positive approach to this recovery. Well, those are the presentations. Now we come to the exciting part, as far as I'm concerned. That is for us to field the questions that you've posed. And we've got a lot of questions in the time remaining. So let's get right into it. And I'll take the first one up. Coming together as a Caribbean region to include inter-regional travel is what I absolutely agree with. The current issues that we're experiencing in the different protocols and regions and regional travelers having difficulty returning to their own country without exemption letters and long, strenuous documentation, which has them stranded outside of their country for months. This is something that should be seriously looked into as having as a protocol. Let's see which of our panelists will take this particular this challenge on. Might be a good one for Minister Cummins here.
How did I know this was going to get thrown my way? But I think part of the challenge that we have to address going forward is perhaps twofold. One, in the first instance, there is a need for information sharing. There is a need for the existence of protocols, and there is very much a need for us to provide as much information, including public health and immigration information as possible in advance, so that it makes the airport process seamless and it also keeps populations safe. But I think, however, that certainly Barbados' own experience has been, especially as it relates to nationals coming home, even during the height of the lockdown period in early February throughout March, Barbados never closed its borders to nationals because we did not identify with the idea of nationals not being able to come home and being stranded in other countries without access to healthcare, with dwindling resources, having to depend on other people to help them get through the period. And also perhaps just dealing with the overall emotion of being caught outside of your home and your family in the middle of a global pandemic that you hadn't seen or experienced anything like it before. So we always have prioritized the importance of nationals being able to come home. Even in instances now, where in cases where airlines are having difficulty with persons being able to get their test results back in time to come into the country, for nationals, even for nationals in those instances, Barbados has been making exemptions and saying we cannot deny entry to Barbadian nationals for any reason. And so we always allow persons to come home, even in the absence of some of the documentation. But that being said, as it relates to nationals, I think that what the region is dealing with is that most of our source markets externally are among those countries dealing with significant surges. They're still dealing with lockdowns. The infection rates are high, the death rates are high, and we have to find that balance between ensuring that we fill hotel beds and airline seats, but we don't do so at a level that allows us to also have to fill hospital beds as well, in particular our ICU capacity. And that really is the balance that we're trying to reach. And so the regulations are important, and they're important especially coming from major source markets where we're dealing with high infection rates, but we also have to be able to carve out arrangements that allow our nationals to fly and to come home at all times.
Thank you, Minister. I've got another question here. It says, on the ground, and at the heart of this is also the psychological recovery of the workforce from some very harsh issues, emotional and otherwise. Will this be taken into consideration as part of the recovery efforts with a view to ensuring the highest level of productivity and service levels?
So I'm actually going to jump in to answer that because Barbados, Barbados, we talked earlier about putting in the financial stimulus to be able to stimulate the hotel sectors. We've talked about wages support to ensure we keep our workers going. And someone said it to me in a way that I think helped me to navigate where we're going next. We have put a lot of the economic measures in place, and we've seen the social measures that needed to be put in place in terms of our industrial relations environment. But one of the things that we needed to talk about was the psychosocial impact of this pandemic and lockdowns and all that it has created on families and household workers. And so we are in the process now of finalizing a program which we're preparing to launch in January, which does exactly that. We're going to be focusing on workers who have been displaced, workers who have now been severed and are unemployed and uncertain what's going to be happening because jobs are in decline in the tourism industry and unemployment levels are at an all-time high. We're also not leaving out those managers and owners of businesses who have had the unfortunate and the painful experience of having to release their workers who are like family to them and who are dealing with the suffering and the stress in many households. We're including also family members. In some instances, both members of a household have been severed or have been laid off for an extended period of time, and they're dealing with that. On cruise ships, for example, we did see suicide rates in some instances where people were just simply unable to process. So we will be launching here in Barbados in January of this year, perhaps maybe by the end of this year, we may be able to roll it out, a complete program which allows for persons to have the benefit of both in-person support, virtual support. We're providing financial support and literacy management as well for persons who, in those instances where they have benefited from severance funds, how to help them navigate holding on to those monies for as long as possible while meeting their daily obligations, and also just basically navigating life in the middle of a COVID pandemic. So that is very much where Barbados is going, and you'll see that coming from us officially in January.
And
All right, thank you again, Minister. I want to put in a question. I want to pose a question here, and I want to put it to Virginia Messina, because I think it covers some of the points raised by a number of the questioners here. When I listen to you talk about the forecast for recovery, and you stretched somewhere between 10 months and 36 months in a period of assessment there, I'm particularly pointed to the role of the vaccine in all of this. But I wish whether you would give some kind of comfort in looking down the road, particularly in a combination between the information you supplied and that came from Ram Rattan earlier from the CDB.
Yes, of course, Julian, and thank you for the question. And just to add to what Minister Cummins was saying, I think absolutely, as I said, health needs to remain the priority, but we do need to see that sort of transition from risk avoidance to risk management. And that is precisely what all these different measures like testing and others will help with. So in terms of the recovery, I think, of course, it's been wonderful news to hear that vaccines will be around hopefully by, say, the summer of next year. It will start hitting most of the populations and countries around the world. So that is really excellent news. But I think, as I said, we need to have very practical measures in place. So just to give you a couple of examples, if I may briefly, recently London opened a corridor with Dubai, right? So that was an air corridor with no restrictions in place, no quarantines. And we've just heard from our member from Dubai airports, within days of that measure being put in place, they saw 2 million bookings just by December. So again, this just tells you about the impact that these practical measures have, and that is exactly what we need to focus on. Spain, on the contrary, for example, is now asking for a negative PCR test to be, or a certificate to be shown on arrival, as many other countries are, but that has actually then negatively impacted and is showing a decrease in bookings by December of nearly 87%. So I think it is this type of practical measures that will help us sort of accelerate that recovery. Of course, most of the points have been covered in the session, from public and private collaboration, which is going to be essential, to all of these sort of standardization of measures that are going to provide confidence to consumers, which is fundamental. But I think if we can focus in very specific measures, we'll start seeing that recovery hopefully by the second semester of next year. That's what we're hoping for.
Okay, thank you very much for that. All right, let me take another one of the questions here. The harmonization of border protocols and any unique requirements of countries could be implemented and presented through a multi-channel digital Caribbean portal for immigration, visa, health protocols, health stamps, and promotion of unique attributes of member countries. Is there investment or financing to make this happen? And are Caribbean destinations buying into the marketing of such a portal? Minister Cummins?
Thanks, Julian. In many ways, some of that is already happening. Some of it has already started in some jurisdictions. And I know that IATA has just recently started a pilot program where they're having what they call the travel pass. And we met with IATA just earlier this week. And what that travel pass would allow people to do is to upload a lot of their travel information, including information on vaccinations and so on, in one single digitized format that can then be transferred across jurisdictions by parties who have signed up. Here in Barbados, we've been working very closely with the JRCC and Impacts as well, specifically as it relates to the digitization of the ED forms. And currently we're involved in a process which is allowing us to expand the number of fields in the ED forms to ensure that we're able to capture as much information into a single portal as you can. I think before COVID even happened, and I think we're lucky in that regard, before COVID unfolded, we'd actually made a lot of the ED card virtual and you were able to fill it out before you landed. Now, during COVID and as a result of COVID, we're expanding the fields. We would very much be willing to collaborate across the region in partnership with entities like IATA and others to ensure that we're able to have this regional international information sharing, and of course the work that has already been done on the ground by JRCC and Impacts.
Thank you very much, Minister Cummins. Let me go to another question here. Thanks for all the presentations, someone says. In terms of upskilling and in some cases reskilling the workforce and digitization, what key skill gaps do you foresee will need to be addressed? Can I point to Michelle Julian for that?
Yes, thank you, Julian. Digital skills are fundamental because this is also the results of the digital transformation, which will be key also for the recovery of many destinations. So training has always been a key competitiveness factor, but taking into consideration the big advancement of digital transformation, there's a huge opportunity also to take into consideration all the opportunity, that digital transformation can bring also to digital skills. And this is, for instance, we can see it in the portal that Minister Lisa Cummins said. There are digital skills now regarding data analysis, but also in the marketing and promotion too. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen that as international tourism is subdued still, we have seen also efforts made by many destinations to be present in the global arena by digital campaigns, for instance, and trying also to look out of the box, to think out of the box, and using those digital skills that could be even more attractive money-wise too, and can also give a lot of opportunities. So yes, digital skills are fundamental.
Julian, if I can jump in as well. I think one of the challenges that we have seen, certainly in terms of the tourism sector with regard to the labor market, has been that many of the studies have said to us that there are an abundance of low-skilled and sometimes low-paying jobs that are made available in the tourism sector. But here we are in the region, a services-driven economy, a knowledge-based economy, and one of the things that we have to do as we develop skills for the tourism sector is to focus on that knowledge-based economy. Now, what does that mean? It does mean that the question that was asked by the attendee is very critical. It means that we have to be able to look at how do we tap into our base as highly educated societies, tertiary level educated societies, knowledge-based economies and services-driven economy to develop skills at all levels of the supply chain, all the way up the way in tourism, especially in the interdisciplinary skill sets that I spoke about earlier. So the notion that once upon a time tourism management on its own was just tourism management, but tourism management in the fourth decade of the 21st century inevitably must treat to the issues of technology, digitization, the introduction of new disruptive technologies, including things like blockchain. And those have to be a part of the skills development sets that we are evolving to be able to take our economies and our region into a new level of developmental skills in the tourism industry.
All right, according to my clock, I got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to just pick one more question here. For the regional policymakers, is there a role for CARICOM in the regional collaboration efforts to recovery? Minister, unfortunately, I've got to ask you that.
I think so. I absolutely think so. So I mentioned earlier that there is a need. There's already a decision that has been taken by the CARICOM heads of government earlier this year on a CARICOM tourism policy. And I think that many of the inputs and the questions that were raised by our attendees here should feed positively into the development of that process, which says that we need to look broader than purely marketing and destinations and attractions and products into a development of a holistic development policy for tourism that is value and supply chain based and looks at the broad issues, including investment, sectoral development, employment creation, employment generation, entrepreneurship, youth engagement, gender. All of these broad cross-cutting issues that are development driven need now to be integrated into a CARICOM-wide policy on tourism. I absolutely agree.
Okay, I'm going to give the last word to Frank Comito, who's got something to add to this.
Yeah, and is there a role for CARICOM? Absolutely. And they have already taken an initiative with heads of government to form a task force, which to their credit is public and private sector. CTO and CHTA are very much part of that work, and the OECS working on some policy strategies and so on, which we're working on almost weekly now. We're meeting, so it's moving in that direction. Now, here's my rub on it as well. That's important, but it also needs to recognize that the Caribbean is broader than CARICOM as well. So we've got to find a way to do that in a mix that also engages places like the Dominican Republic, like the Mexican Caribbean, like the French and US islands and so on. It really needs a broader type of approach. But our challenge has never been greater, and the opportunity, in my view, has never been greater. We've jump-started this numerous times, and I'm hopeful, particularly with the collaboration we're seeing locally and regionally around health safety protocols and so on, and testing, and we have agreement on stamps of approvals and health safety stamps and so on. That's pretty exciting. So I think there's an appetite for it.
And on that optimistic note, we come to the end of this particular forum. It's given us an opportunity to look at the possible strategies for tourism recovery for our region. I want to thank all the panelists, and particularly you, the audience, and those particularly who sent questions in, etc. And I want to remind you that there's a recording of this that will be available 48 hours from now. And also there'll be a playback of this on regional television and cable systems as well. I'm Julian Rogers with a very special thank you to our host, the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, and the Caribbean Tourism Organization, with special support from the Department of Tourism of the the U.S. Virgin Islands, and of course to Sandals International, and very special coordination and support coming from the World Tourism Organization and the Caribbean Development Bank. To all of you, let's wish for the very best. Wish you a great Christmas holiday, make it safe, and let's make sure that we recover from this pandemic in 2021 and beyond. All the very best to you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Virgin Islands. Oh na na, oh na na na. Reconnect with paradise. The VI smiles with me, with the emeralds of the seas.